is this bell? All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to all of you here in Rosemead, as well as, Hacienda. I always forget where I am. They were having trouble hearing me on the internet, so trying to put this in front of my mouth. This time I was holding it, and I think they didn't. So can you hear me? So is that better? Good. Please always, raise a hand and shout when it's not right. I'm willing to change. Yes. We're all friends, so please. I want to talk about Bodhisattvas and continue our discussion from last night. I don't know if you've had some time to think about what it all means, but I hope you have, and we will later open up this morning for more discussion. So please be prepared. One of the definitions which the Prajnaparamita gives us for a bodhisattva is that a bodhisattva simply means to be a bodhisattva is to train without obstructions, to know things as they really are, and that's all it means to be a bodhisattva. Simple, but as with everything that's simple, it's very complex at the same moment. Okay. Just take somebody opening a door and there. So in Buddhism, I think this last thing that's the real definition, not only of bodhisattva, but it's the definition of the Buddhist Dharma as teaching, to know things as they really are. And that implies a lot of thinking and exploration to determine things as they really are. A bodhisattva is often said to be adorned. And it's a strange word. It means, in the Sanskrit and Chinese, it means to decorate. They're decorated. As you know, one of the ways that we tell the difference between a bodhisattva image and a Buddha image is Buddhas are never adorned. Usually, they don't have any jewelry. They just have Buddha images, just have a robe. Whereas bodhisattvas are very often adorned, as is this image. They have crowns, they have jewels, they have necklaces, they have, I don't know what you call an armband that's decorated. In the Dasha Bhumika, which is the 10 levels of a bodhisattva, it says that as a bodhisattva reaches an attainment of some type, then the necklace that they have around their gets a new segment. So when you look at a necklace and you see the divisions that are on it, each one of those means that the bodhisattva has attained one more of the 10 levels of a bodhisattva. In other words, these are a little bit like what an army would do. An army tells you what accomplishment somebody has by the decorations or the symbols that are on the uniforms. Excuse me. It's the same when I fly a lot and I see the pilot walk by. I look to see how many stripes they have on their sleeve. 4 stripes is a full pilot. 2 stripes, uh-oh. So adornments mean something because they mean an accomplishment, completion. We do that when you graduate from college. We adorn you. Put a robe on and put a hat, put a tassel, change the tassel. We change your adornment. So a bodhisattva is one who is adorned. So when you see bodhisattvas with their jewels, it's not just that they're showing off that they're rich and they can put on jewels. That's not at all what it means. It's saying a bodhisattva who is really accomplished will have a lot of adornments because they're the metaphor for their spiritual accomplishment. As we mentioned last night, not only is the Bodhisattva adorned, but the Prajnaparamita text itself, we're told, should be treated as if it was a Buddha. We don't usually do that. We put these texts in a library. They're treated like any other book. We normally don't do that because many years ago, I took students on a field trip in the mountains in Nepal, and we went from one Sherpa monastery to another to see what books they had. And every place we went, when we said, what Buddhist text do you have here? Because we were looking to see if, when they came over the mountains from Tibet, they had brought special books. Everybody had the Mother. That is, they had a set of the Prajnaparamita. Prajnaparamita texts are the mother of the Bodhisattva. So they all said, oh, we have Uma, we have the Mother. And they were very proud to have the Mother. And it was not as if they ever read it. It was not the idea of reading so much as they understood what they had and they revered it. So what is a bodhisattva in terms of the Buddha? The text says bodhisattva is like stars in the sky and the Buddha is like the moon. Sometimes you have the moon and the stars. But then the moon has a way of setting. It doesn't stay in the sky all the time. So some nights you go out, there's no moon. Sometimes you're born and there's no Buddha. What do you do when there's no Buddha? What do you do when the sky at night has no moon? Then the stars. So they use the metaphor that the bodhisattva is like the stars that are across the sky, and the moon is the Buddha. It also tells you that it's okay for there not to be a moon. That's one of the things about the Bodhisattva teaching. A Bodhisattva can substitute for the Buddha. And in some cases, you almost feel that they're saying, because the Bodhisattva, like the stars, will always be there on every night, they're more important, even. So in some cases, Bodhisattva has been elevated in terms of who they are and what they can accomplish. How do you recognize a bodhisattva and who are they is always been very difficult. In some cases, some Buddhists would say, everybody in this room is a bodhisattva. And that's a very common idea among a large number of Buddhists. In Korea, if you go to a Buddhist monastery and you say, do you have any bodhisattvas? They will usually say, oh yes, we do. And then you say, aha, they've got a good teacher. And so they point to usually some elderly women who are cooking and washing and cleaning up the monastery for the monks, and they say, there are our bodhisattvas. That's the only time anybody in Korea is said to be a bodhisattva, is when you join that crew that does the work. So it's quite, depends on where you are as to how people are going to use this word and tell you who and what it means. In the Pali tradition of Theravada, the bodhisattva only refers to the past lives of Shakyamuni. He had many past lives, and in every past life, he was called a bodhisattva. That is, for them, it meant somebody who's going to become a Buddha but isn't yet. It's a preparatory phase leading toward Buddhahood. So Bodhisattva from the Prajnaparamita, I think, is quite different than what I see in terms of usage in today's world. The Bodhisattva that we hear described in the Prajnaparamita is not just a good person who's willing to work and help out. It's not just an ordinary person in many ways. It has a very specific definition, which is a person of very high development, so high that they could be a substitute for a Buddha. One of the most famous passages, though, is when the Bodhisattva conceives the thought, I am going to take and help millions of beings get to Nirvana. And once I have done that, I will know that there's not a single living being that's been led to Nirvana. In other words, this is somewhat like what we were talking about last night. You can say, hey, leading people to Nirvana is a really good thing. Good, I'll do it. And hey, I've done it. I've led millions of people to Nirvana. And then comes the kickback. But there's not a single living being that's been led to Nirvana. What did you do? What really did you do? And it's this testing of us that we've been talking about. Every time you feel, I know what I should do, I'm going to do it. And then it's like, well, but guess what? All that work you did, there was not a single living being that was taken. So was it wasted? The text would not say so. But this is part of what a bodhisattva is faced with. So a lot of people say, boy, it's really hard to be a bodhisattva. Here you have to work your head off and spend your whole life at something, and yet nothing happens. What does that mean? Isn't that the most difficult thing that you could possibly ask somebody? It's like what they used to do in prisons. They would put in a bunch of rocks and ask prisoners to beat the rocks in the gravel. And then once they made the gravel, they just threw them away and brought in another set of rocks for them to beat into gravel. and it was considered to be hard labor. So that's what a lot of people say about a bodhisattva. This is hard labor, because you're asked to just repeat the same thing over and over, which does not result in some great and glorious event. But the Prajnaparamita itself says, the Buddha says, I would never ask a bodhisattva to do something difficult. Bodhisattvas do not do difficult things. If a bodhisattva feels, I am doing a difficult thing, they better stop, because they don't get it. In some ways, I've come to kind of joke about myself that I have a Taoist side, and the Taoist side of me says, if something is really complicated and just doesn't seem to work, I probably shouldn't be doing it. As much as I might want it, it just seems like every time I try to do it, it won't work. It just doesn't. Other things are just absolutely easy. It's like there's no obstruction and there's no problem. It just happens. And in many ways, I think that that is what a bodhisattva should live by. That it's not difficult if what you do is very natural and it just happens. That's good. So a bodhisattva, having taught this, then we're told flowers from heaven shower down over the bodhisattva. And you often get this in Buddhist ceremonies. It's a very nice thing. It's sort of, I've often wondered if this is where confetti comes from. When you throw confetti at a parade and people throw confetti, that basically the confetti is just another way of saying flowers fall from heaven. And these beautiful fluttering flowers fall all around you. So when the Buddha teaches, flowers will often fall from heaven. When the Bodhisattva teaches, the flowers come down. It's like the confetti flows from heaven. But then you get this thing where the Bodhisattva's sitting there and these flowers are falling all around. And the Bodhisattva says, these flowers have never grown from anything. So how can they be what I'm talking about as a flower? These flowers floating down from heaven, which are all around me, they never grew on a plant. They were never a seed. They didn't mature. So how can I even call them a flower? It's once again the idea that you say, oh, hooray, hooray, here I'm going to scatter flowers over you. And then the Bodhisattva says, well, that's all well and good, but these flowers you're scattering over me are in fact not flowers. The real nature of these things is they didn't grow. You miraculously produce them up there. So it's like somebody who makes plastic flowers and then rains them down on you. You know, well, you want to say, well, they're nice, very nice, but these never grew as a plant, you know. What the Bodhisattva knows is that people that they work with are illusory within their perception. And I think it's very important to know that it's within your perception, that how we perceive these people that are being taught is that there is an illusory quality to it. For example, you're all sitting here, I'm theoretically teaching you, you're looking at me and saying, there's the teacher. In both cases, though, there is an aspect of, in various levels, of illusion. I really don't know everything about every one of you by any means. You don't know everything about me by any means. We see each other at one level. We see each other when we're all out in public and I've got on my tie, and that's going to be very different if you saw me in the morning. When I first got up, you would say, well, that doesn't look like that person that I had in front of me when I was. We all have such a complexity of personality, of experience, of life. And I don't know about you, but the greatest difficulty I have is to figure out who I am. It's not easy. I'm not always sure how much is my ego involved in what I'm doing? How much am I really doing what I'm doing because at one level I'm angry? Am I jealous? Am I envious? Why am I doing what I'm doing? If I really ask myself, sometimes I don't know. I simply don't know exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. It takes a while for me to try to be so aware of myself and everything that I do that I know the motivations. And sometimes I have to accept it. I'm envious. There it is. I'm angry. There it is. How do I then deal with the fact that this person that I am is as illusory to me as I am to you? I'm just as illusory. And to try to find out who I am and what I am is extremely difficult. So the Prajnaparamita says, the Bodhisattva knows that they themselves are illusory. That the vision of myself will change all day long. Sometimes I feel pretty good about myself and think, oh, things are going all right, this is pretty good. People seem to be responding appropriately. They applaud when I say something. It's going all right. And then at the very next moment, I think, that person frowned at me. What's going on? What did I do was wrong? And then I go into a tailspin and try to figure out now what's happening. Do I have to change my way of acting? Do I have to be something else? So when we think we're just knowing who we are and we know what we're doing, from the Prajnaparamita point of view, they're saying it's just as illusory when you're trying to figure that out as it is for any other thing that you do. The illusory nature of our perception, and as we talked about last night, the limit of our perceptions are constantly there as a challenge. So, I read the text and I say, all right, I'm heading for Nirvana. That's my goal. That's what I want. Isn't that what the Buddha got? That's what I want. I want Nirvana. And then here comes this text and it says to me, you know, don't you, that Nirvana is like a dream. And then I could say, oh, well, I want more than a dream. I want the real thing. I want Nirvana. And then the text says, and anything beyond Nirvana, if there's something beyond it, that's also a dream. It's just a dream. And then it's like, what in the world should I do? It's like, I'm running as fast as I can, as they say. I'm trying my best to be not an illusory person. I'm trying my best to reach nirvana. I'm trying my best to be enlightened. And then you tell me it's like a dream? So the more we think about it, I have to tell you, it seems to me that our perceptions begin to appear to us as if they are like a dream. And then you may be in deep trouble. The difference between enlightenment and madness is sometimes very narrow. You can have something which can be a fantastic development, and yet at the same time, you can have that thing become pathological. It's like if I want to be compassionate to somebody and give them something. That's good. And that should happen. And yet it is possible for even compassion and being willing to give somebody something can become pathological. That I can become so involved in doing it that I forget myself, I don't take care of my other needs, I'm not able to live a normal life. Jeffrey accompanied me to Guangzhou. We were just there. And two events that happened that I felt disturbed about. I didn't quite know how to handle it. We were walking with monks. And two times, individuals who looked as if they were very disturbed and life was out of control for them, threw themselves on the ground in front of the monks and offered money. And I just felt, this person is in real trouble. It's a good thing to bow to a monk, and it's a good thing to give a donation. But I felt what I'm witnessing here is pathology. Person who's in really deep, deep need. And in both cases, and I talked to one of the monks later, he said, when that happens, and he said, you'd be surprised how often it happens, that people come before you who are really disturbed, and they're coming to a monk or to somebody because they really need help. And they're unable to hear or deal with life in many ways. There's no way that you can just sit them down right then and there and talk them out of this. This is deep, deep problems. But he said, you always take the money from them. Because they really need to have something that makes them feel, I've done something to try to make it better. And then maybe it will be a little better for them. You don't just say, you're sick, I don't want to take anything from you. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, go do what you need to do. So our perceptions are in some senses begin to appear in a dreamlike state. And then we have to be very careful that that dreamlike state doesn't fall over into pathology. We have to always be aware that we're struggling with what doesn't have to be normal or average or whatever, but it can go the other way. So then the question comes up. What should I choose? So I go out into the forest and I say, which tree is the best for me? How can I find maple tree. I'll tap it, I'll get maple syrup. I like maple syrup. I'll find that particular tree and I'll get the reward. What if you could only select a tree from its shadow? How could you find the particular one you want? And the answer is you couldn't, probably. If all you have is a shadow, you have a vague outline, but you don't have enough information. The shadows of trees are just a shadow. All trees cast shadows. There's no distinguishing mark necessarily in that shadow, in that darkness. So that's an issue that we have when we're trying to decide what should we do? What should we choose? If all we have is a sign that's a shadow, it's going to be really hard to make the choice. We need more than a shadow. But usually that's all life gives us. That's what we get. We get shadows. And we get something which is the same here as there. It's like when we're saying, okay, I have to make a decision. Shall I take this job or this job? It's going to change my life, so I want to choose the best one. But often I cannot decide what is the best one because all I have for the two jobs is a kind of shadowy feeling of there's what I know about this and what I know about this, but I don't see any difference between them. I can't distinguish. I don't have enough information. I need more color. I need more detail. I need somebody to be able to predict what it means for me. And you're not going to get it. You're just left with the shadow. And we're choosing between shadows. As a result, our choices are not necessarily choosing what we think we want. We have to make a choice, and it won't necessarily give us what we're hoping for. So, the Bodhisattva, how does a Bodhisattva make a decision? The Bodhisattva is faced, as we all are, with signs. Every one of these little dots, somebody put together, they're signs that you find by the road. You put together the thousands and thousands of signs that you see every day. And those signs are what we use to make our decisions. We live by signs. But the Bodhisattva says signs are just shadows. How do I know? Is it better to drink a Coke or a Pepsi? The signs tell me one is better and the other says this is better, and they're just giving me a shadow. I might find that I like one better than the other. Or I might find it doesn't seem to matter. I either like them both or I hate them both. Which one is it going to be? But now imagine, can you imagine living without signs? And what is a sign? In one way, a sign is simply a representation of a characteristic. So, I could say to you, what is the true nature of an apple? Very comparable to what Alex here said to me about his thinking last night. What's the true nature of an apple? Well, true nature of an apple is apple. That's its true nature. So my wife tells me, go to the store and shop. Okay, what shall I shop for? Get some apples. Well, you can't just tell me to get apples, because I'm going to come home with the wrong kind, right? And you can say, what did you bring home these green, hard apples for, when of course what we want is a sweet eating apple? The sign, I need a sign. Tell me what the sign I should look for. Look for red. Look for red delicious. Look for sweetness. Can you possibly think of going shopping without a sign? Just think what it would be like if you go into the grocery store and you are not going to go by any signs or characteristics. What would you select? Would it be what you really want? And I can tell you that there are often cases, and it may just be in my household, where the husband goes out and shops without signs, and when it comes home, it's not right because it's just an apple, and that's not what we want. We want a special apple and a specific apple for a specific function and purpose. So how in the world can I live my life without any characteristics, any signs? If I just walk into the grocery store and say, okay, pears, I don't even look at just a pear. Apples, any apple. I just walk through and I select, what would I come out with? Probably something which would not be to my liking. We live by signs. We live by characteristics. So it's like I'm talking to a friend of mine in India. His son has come to the time to get married. So I said, are you going to arrange the marriage? And he looked at me as if I was crazy, and he said, of course. What do you mean? Is there any other way? And so I said, well, where will you find his wife? And he comes from a small village in Tamil Nadu, and he said, from the village. And I said, really? You know the girl's still in, because he lives in Mumbai, and I said, you know who's still in the village? And you can select from them? Well, fortunately, he knows a family in Mumbai who are from that village. So he knows a girl who's from that village, who has never been to that village, but her ancestry comes from that village, so therefore she is acceptable for him to choose as the bride for his son. She has the sign. She has the characteristic. She's not just somebody off the street. She's not just any person. She is person of good family. She is person of the village family. She is one of us. So the very idea of saying to him, hey, marriage requires that you select a young woman for your husband, to be married, become part of your family, make your son her husband. Don't be fooled with all these signs. Just go out on the street, and the first woman you see, you got a woman. No signs. Well, those shadowy references are what we live with. We think we're making very specific decisions. He thinks, and maybe he's quite right, he knows exactly who to select for his son because he knows all of the signs that he will attribute to the girl that he wants his son to have as a wife. And his son will accept his decision with no complaint. But as we know, individuals are very different. And the signs that we see do not always tell us what we think they show us. Back to the grocery store. I go to the grocery store. I want a sweet cantaloupe. And if you can tell me how, of all those hundreds of cantaloupes, which one has a sign that I can read that says this cantaloupe is ripe and sweet and ready to eat and not mushy, I feel I'm just looking at shadows, and I pick one of the shadows, and I get it home, and it's still not ripe. Very often. We need signs, we want signs, we believe sometimes we have them, and so what does it mean that a bodhisattva does not by means of shadows or signs come to wisdom? How do they get to wisdom if they don't have any of these signs or indicators? The text goes on to say, if you follow signs, it's going to lead you to illusory beings who have nothing to give. In other words, my friend in India might select a young woman who is absolutely perfect for his son, and they live happily ever after, and I hope that will be the case. On the other hand, even though the signs are all there, it may be the chemistry doesn't work, and a lifetime of misery awaits both of them. And I can tell you that I have Indian friends who've had arranged marriages where that is the case. I look at them and say, why don't they like each other? Because I can see why their families chose them. They really should love each other and like each other because they're wonderful, both are wonderful people. And I would say, hey, you're lucky, you've got somebody. But in many cases, it's like, it doesn't work for me. This is not the person I want to be with. It doesn't matter that the signs all say we should be gloriously happy and delighted. It just doesn't work this time. So if we follow signs, they can lead us to illusory beings who have nothing to give us. The signs indicated there was a lot there, but when you get there, when my daughter was growing up, she once said, I just wish I lived in a normal family. And so recently I was teasing her about that, and I said, remember when you said you just wish you lived in a normal family? And she said, that was before I realized that there is no normal family. They're all dysfunctional at some level. We all have to live with, in a sense, we can have the outer signs would be, hey, this is a great family and everybody's happy and prosperous and everything is just fine. But the signs are illusory. They are pointing to an illusion of something which all of us, I think you know that. The more you know somebody, the more you know their problems. And you can still love them and like them, but you also begin to see them in different lights all the time. And sometimes you find out, I think this friendship is over. It's not working. We don't jibe. It just isn't there. Again, when I was raising my children, we had many friends because they had children and they were playmates. And you wanted somebody to help you take care of your children. That is, let your children come over and play with mine so mine will be happy and not bother me. So you make friends with a lot of people because the signs are, here's a good friendship. We have a lot in common. And then the kids grow up and leave home. And you suddenly realize, I have nothing in common with that person. There's no reason to get together unless we have young children who like to play together. Otherwise, we don't do it. You lose all of those friends. I don't know if they were ever friends, but you just, the signs were one way for that time, that place, but signs or shadows. And if you live by signs, then the issues are always before you. So we have a new word, affluenza. But affluenza is really very close to this whole idea. If you raise somebody, a young person, with wealth or prosperity, the signs that come with that for that young person may be very destructive to them. And they can't handle it. I know that one of the Getty children said about growing up in what was probably the richest home in the US at one time, money is so dangerous. Money scares me because of what it can do to you. The signs that money has, that person is rich. That's a good sign, right? But now people are beginning to ask, what do we do with the affluenzic people? And it's not as if this is new. We've had affluenza for a long time. We've had it wherever you have people who grow up with the signs of richness and think that those signs really indicate that you've got a good life. But if you have affluenza and you have isolation, a sense of isolation, a sense of depression, there are also signs. Those signs say, well, there's something here that's not working quite right. How do you deal with this? And so we come to the biggest question which comes up for this kind of thing, which is, how do you know that the signs which you're following or the teaching which you're following is what you think it is? And when have you got hold of something which is a counterfeit of what you thought you were going to find? When I grew up, my family had egg form. And I became very cynical about signs with the egg form, because we sold the eggs to several different grocery stores. So when we packed the eggs, they were just the same eggs, but sometimes we packed them in a carton which said, these are the freshest eggs available. There's nothing better in the world than what's in this package. And we would ship those off. And then in came the next, and we opened it up, and this one said, our eggs are the healthiest, the best. You can't buy another egg that's like what you're going to get in this package. And I'm looking here and I'm looking there and thinking, but they're the same eggs. There's no difference. The only difference is the sign. We changed the sign on it, and the sign makes a big difference. I watched this happen. My grandmother was a rather remarkable person. She was left a widow at a very young age, and she had 4 children, and she decided to raise them on her own. And she figured the best way to do this in that day and age was to become a farmer. So she became a farmer, so her children could grow up in the country. And she didn't have very much money, and she wouldn't let anybody help her. So she planted seeds from apples to make apple trees for her orchard. But of course, if you plant an apple seed, you don't know what you're going to get. Talk about a sign. You can take a beautiful apple that you love, and you take the seed from it and plant it, but it's not true to that apple. It can be anything. The DNA in the apple will just be mixed by the bees that went from flower to flower. And so she got some very peculiar apples, really peculiar apples. And sometimes they were so bad that you just couldn't use them for anything. But she had 4 trees that pretty much produced an apple. Apples were very close. They were from 4 seeds that came from the same apple. And they were a nice yellow apple, and they're quite tasty. Nobody would ever buy them. Because when I took them to the market, people would say, what apple is this? I've never seen one quite like it. Well, it's a seedling. We don't know what it is. Nobody wanted to buy them. So she, being pretty wise, said, I'm going to give these apples a sign. So she said to the next person, they're summer pippins. Nobody had ever heard of a summer pippin. But she always sold every one of those apples thereafter. People would wait to get a summer pippin from her trees. She changed the sign. And when the sign was changed, it changed people's perception. But the perception was illusory because they were the same apples, whether they were seedlings or summer pippins, made no difference, except in the way in which people thought. So thinking they were summer pippins, they loved them. Isn't it nice? I don't have to wait to October now to have a pippin. I can have it right here in the summer with this wonderful summer pippin. Is that counterfeit? Was she lying? She was inventive, let's put it that way. So I think that when we look at signs, we just have to understand the characteristics and things, that it's partly how we perceive it and how we structure what we think to be. So these summer pippins were illusory. There really is no such thing. The pippin has its own DNA, and these didn't have that. But they had enough of the characteristics that you could maybe, as she did, you could sell them. So when we try to deal with wisdom and the signs that we live with, how do we have enough wisdom to know what to do with the signs? You're going to have signs, I can tell you that. You cannot get rid of them. You're going to have characteristics around you all day long. You're going to have competing claims. You're going to have your own projections onto everybody else. You're going to have that. So when is it that it's real and when does it become counterfeit? And that's part of what the Prajnaparamita texts are trying to deal with and say to people. So the way they describe it is this. They say there is counterfeit Prajnaparamita. There is counterfeit wisdom. There are counterfeit apples. Counterfeit Prajnaparamita can be beautiful. But like a lot of foods that look good, it's pure poison. It's just like mushrooms, you know. If you look at some of the mushrooms, the most beautiful ones are very often like the red ones. Beware. But it's very hard with mushrooms because the signs are just as illusory for them as anything else. And what really worried me is when the head of the American Society for Mushrooms in San Francisco ate a very poisonous mushroom and died. He took the signs of the mushroom that he looked at and did not realize that there had been a slight mutation in the San Francisco area of Death's Angel, where it was beginning to mimic another mushroom which is not poisonous. And so people who were eating this mimicked counterfeit one were having liver transplants and death, and the poison, beautiful, looked right, had the right signs, but was completely virulent. So that this is something, it's like last night I showed you the pictures of what would of all the people who were shouting at Hitler rallies in the 1930s, it all looked so beautiful. It was filled with glorious images of banners, and people were cheering, and it seemed as if this was the most beautiful solution, simple solution to the problems of a nation. And yet, like poisonous food that looks really good, it had built into it a poison which eventually would bring the country to a terrible state of destruction. What looks, the signs of beauty do not necessarily tell you whether you can even trust it. That's why signs and characteristics are a problem for how we deal with life and how we deal with the wisdom which we want to get from it. And yet, as I say, you're not going to get rid of the signs. These mushrooms that are here poisonous, they're still out there. They're still beautiful. Those signs are still with us. There are still people who are going to mistake some of them for another one, and they're going to suffer from it. So how do you stop from having counterfeit Prajnaparamita? How can you keep yourself from saying, I'm really trying to understand this, and so as I understand it, I realize that when I think I've got it, sometimes I don't have it, But suppose I'm trying to understand something which is counterfeit, then what? And we have to think in these terms. So it's like anger, the signs of anger. What are the signs of anger? What do we do with the signs of anger? I think that the people who make Botox should take carefully what the Prajnaparamita texts say. It says, if you've got a lot of anger, your face is going to be ravished. You're going to have, if you've got that kind of anger and despair or dissatisfaction, you're going to get some wrinkles, and you better get ready to have a little Botox to fill in those wrinkles. So look for anger if you got looking for your new customer for Botox. It tells us a bodhisattva is always helpful, has no ego, and never speaks in anger or hatred. Well, I'm looking for that person. That's a person, that's somebody you really want to say, hey, where are you? I'm always in need. I would like to have somebody who's not so involved with their own agenda that they can't come over and see what my needs are. And so counterfeit Prajnaparamita would be what produces hatred, what produces anger, what produces ego, and what produces inability to be helpful. In other words, the signs of the counterfeit Prajnaparamita is that. Sometimes, I've lived my whole life in the academic world. People who say the ivory tower, the signs of the academic with the ivory tower. Inside the ivory tower, when you live inside the ivory tower, you are filled with people who are sometimes so surprisingly smart and immature that it just is startling. I feel as if I lived my life with really, really smart children, often. I lived my life with really smart children. That it was amazing to me that people who in one area of their life could be absolutely brilliant, really brilliant, nobody could match them. And then in another part of their life, be completely unable to cope. And I'm that way too. I'm not so brilliant, I can tell you that, but I have to look at myself sometimes because I cannot fix a car. I just can't do it. I do not know what to do if my car has any trouble. And I say to myself, come on, for pity's sakes, you have a PhD. You should be able to learn how to deal with this wretched machine. You ought to be able to do this. And I feel the same sometimes with the computers. As poor Jeffrey knows, I snatched his computer from him because my computer just went out. And I couldn't do anything with it. I couldn't fix it. How could I be so dumb? How could I be so lacking in information and knowledge that I can't do that? I ought to be able to. We're all faced with the fact that we're these strange mixtures. our signs are mixed. So if you go to somebody who's really smart in one area and you think, aha, there's a sign, there's a brilliant person, I'm going to ask them what to do about my emotional life. Think again. Think again. Brilliance does not necessarily mean ability to deal with the emotions. So the signs that you're getting, you have to ask yourself the question, what are the signs and what do they really mean? And how can I trust what these signs mean for me? I would say for myself, my granddaughters have taught me a lot about signs. When I was a parent, I still am, but when I was having to raise children, I lived by signs. Were they sick? Did they have a temperature? Were they doing their homework? Were they eating the right food? Were they eating too much sugar? Were they washing their hands? Did they brush their teeth? Did they take a bath? I lived by signs. And so as a result, being a parent is really tough work. And it's so much work sometimes that you can hardly say that it's pleasurable. It's like you're pulling your hair out. And then along come my beautiful granddaughters. I take them as they are. I don't worry about whether they've brushed their teeth. I don't have to worry about whether or not they're eating the right food. When they come to see me, it's just we're together. We're signless. And it's marvelous. It's really marvelous. Of course, I'm putting the responsibility on their parents. You know, here, you better take this problem and go home. But there is a kind of wonderful quality about being signless with somebody. Not trying to make them something. Not feeling I have to follow every little sign of this person. I can just enjoy them. So I've joked that maybe the way to live a good life is to jump immediately to being grandparents. Just skip the parent. Just go to this joyous stage, but of course we can't do that. You have to pay the dues, I suppose. But think about your own friendships. How many times do you have a friendship where you're living by signs? And when do you have a friendship in which the signs don't really matter? There is enough trust, there is enough belief in the relationship that the sign is not what you're looking for. You don't have to worry about it. It's like the Chinese recognized this a long time ago. The Chinese in the Han Dynasty had a movement which was called the movement of impoliteness. And it became such an issue that it was outlawed. But this society said, if I meet you and you can't insult me, then you can't be my friend. Because that's what we can do with friends. We can tease. We can say anything to a friend and it's okay. They know. We can say, boy, you're looking bad this morning. And, yeah, well, you don't look so good yourself. And we banter back and forth. because we know it's okay. We're not going to have a split because of this banter. We know that our relationship is secure enough that I can say anything. I can tease. But in other situations, I can't do that. In other situations, I realize when I'm living with, or the relationship is of a signed relationship, then politeness is necessary. Sensitivity to exactly what the other person wants and is thinking may be necessary. I can't just be completely open. I can't just expect that if I say anything that's in my head, that I'm not going to hurt feelings, I'm going to have resentment, I'm going to have a break. I don't trust it that much because I don't think it's that strong. So that's why this whole area of the sign is so crucial in understanding the question which we were raising last night. How can you truly understand how to have wisdom? And you can't have it through signs. And yet signs are all around us and we don't know how to live without them. So how can I get to wisdom? Because I've got signs. It's like the Far Side cartoon that I haven't keep because it's for some reason it just tickles me very much. The man is in the doctor's office and he has cow's heads growing out of his knees, and the doctor's saying, "John, you have cows." And it's like that kind of, when I'm thinking about how I live with people, there are certain people that I really would like to say, "John, you have cows." You've got something that's really your thing, but it's pretty difficult to live with. But I wouldn't dare say it in many cases because it's a sign, and the friendship needs another kind of relationship. So with wisdom, when it says to me, you've got to go to wisdom without a sign, the closest thing I can come in one way is to say, that's the kind of friendship where, or love and trust between two people where it doesn't matter what you say. You are not going to have to live by signs. You're free. Or with my granddaughters, we just love to be together. And we don't have to use signs. We just are together. I couldn't do that with my own children. I had to sign my own children. And because we have to sign our own children, we are often not very wise with our children. The wisdom gets left out of it. So these are all ways to try to push forward with the kind of thinking of how do you get to this Prajnaparamita? How do you get to this perfection of wisdom, which allows you to have a state where the ego begins to fade, in which you don't have anger and hatred, and which you can have compassion and be always helpful without feeling resentful about it. I think that one of the worst things you can do, and me too, worst thing I can do, is to find yourself being very helpful and then resenting it. After all I've done for that person. And then they turn on me. if you have that kind of sensation, then that's signs. That's the counterfeit, where the compassion of helping was somehow tied up with my own ego. And maybe even with, I'm going to show them how really good I am so they'll know how really bad they are. And we have these lowering thoughts sometimes. We don't like to hear them in our head, but boy, they're there sometimes. And those are signs. That's what sign means. So when you read the Prajnaparamita, and it says, the Bodhisattva is one, who when they meet with someone else, when they attempt to reach toward and direct their attention toward enlightenment, they do not reside in signs. They do not reside in characteristics. They do not reside in the idea that there is permanence. They do not reside in any of these signs, and therefore they're able to do it. However, if you say, oh, I'm going to stop living in signs, when you get yourself in that boat where you say, I'm not going to do it anymore, I promise, go to the grocery store. Ask yourself, can I really be in this grocery store and shop without signs, without characteristics? Can I do that? What would it mean if I did that? How in the world do I have the wisdom to have no signs and yet be able to still function in a way which is normal and allows me to have a normal life? How can I do that? And that's why the texts, I think, are constantly jabbing us to say, it is so easy to intellectually say, I got it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to have any signs. Good, good. And then the text comes back and says, oh, really? You think that that's what I was trying to tell you to do? That I was trying to tell you to make up your mind that you're not going to have any more signs? Is that what I was trying to do in the teaching? Is that what you think has happened? That you've made a decision? Do you think that making a decision not to have any more signs is the same as wisdom? Is that what wisdom is? The text is pushing us to another level of dealing with this. Not these easy, facile, I got it, okay, I'm finished, no more signs, as if we could do that. It means, therefore, that for the Bodhisattva, what do they say? How did Bodhisattva get to this place? They didn't get it by a snap decision. The texts say, these Bodhisattvas in lifetime after lifetime after lifetime have been practicing so they could do this. It says it's hard, and you've got to practice. So when you go into the grocery store, if you think, okay, I'm just going in right now and give up on signs, you can't do it, I don't think. If you do, it won't be satisfactory and you'll soon stop doing it. But you might try to think, and we'll discuss this later, what if you just gave up today one sign? What could it be? Easy practice. I'm not going to be perfect. What one sign could I say, today I'm going to practice living without this particular sign? Which one would you choose that you think you could actually live the whole day being aware of not using it? Just one. going to leave that for you to think about. So we're going to take a break, but do you have a burning question or a burning comment you'd like to make before we take our break? Cannot wait, yes. All right, I will not stand between you and the break. During the break, if you can practice without one sign, please let us know. We're all anxious to learn from one another. Okay, let's take a break. Thank you very much. We'll have 15 minutes. I'm trying to think who he is.
Oh, that's Venerable Hui Dong.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was trying to. Sure. I have it in my bag. I'll give it to you.
When are you going back?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay. And then you come back for the weekend only also, right? Next week?
I'll come back Thursday. Thursday night.
Also, there's a lady, her name is Remy Chiu. She is an IBS member. She also goes to
into session. Yes, where is the... Yeah. Yes. Well, you would. Yeah. Right. All right, well, come back into session. Okay, how many managed to have a break without a sign? What was it?
So I grabbed my chips without signing for color. So I didn't pay attention to the sign of what color my chips were. I just grabbed it.
All right. How about somebody else? Did you manage? Yes?
I came up with a sign to give up and then I forgot to give it up.
That might have been giving up.
Well, the sign was this smile. Usually you engage with somebody if they smile.
Mhm.
Wouldn't if they don't.
Yes.
So you just try to ignore that completely. But and then I forgot to do it.
So if you want him to speak to you, smile, or no, it doesn't matter.
Don't take the smile of the other person at any time either way without
Yeah. All right. Anybody else did one? Well, you have an assignment for lunch time. Can you eat lunch without a sign? Yes, please.
But it's about the idea of giving up. To me, it sounds similar to what we talked about last night, where we have this image that we know isn't really right, but then you can't give it up fully either, to be virtual reality. That's not true. It feels it's the same thing with signs. You know they're not perfect, and you know they don't give you everything. They're not the same as truth,
Yeah.
but you still recognize they're useful. So giving them up entirely, even though they're so useful, doesn't seem to be a good answer either, right?
Okay.
They're two extremes.
For those of you on the internet, he's asking the question about that signs can have a reasonable usage function. So to give them all up, could we really do that? Excuse me. And I think it's a good question. I don't know the answer. I'm struggling with this like everybody else because it's I'm trying to read the text as it speaks to me, and this is what I'm seeing. We certainly don't want you to not obey the red light. That would not be a good idea. So what do you think that Prajnaparamita text is talking about?
And is it possible that instead of meaning don't read the signs, can it mean don't fully trust signs?
I don't know. They don't say that. They don't use those particular words. So what kind of state would I be in if I could just give up all signs?
It leads me to wonder, is it, so if we were Bodhisattvas, would it be that we don't need the signs, or we don't use the signs? I see two different, at least two different possibilities, right? Like, one is, signs exist, but I don't need them because I'm in a state that I can navigate without needing the sign and still arrive at whatever it is I'm trying to arrive at. Or technically, actually, I'm trying to arrive at anywhere. Or I just don't need them. So do I use them or do I not need them? I wonder about.
Yeah. Her question is it that Bodhisattva doesn't use the signs or doesn't need the signs? Use and need are different.
So maybe have to do a little more diligence in this regard as are. So if you go to the supermarket, can't tell if what cantaloupe is across the shopping, something that smells. So should you have done your internet research before you figure out what is how do you tackle cantaloupe or find out.
Well, or sometimes the cilantro is marked as parsley. So we don't have to know that that's not really parsley, that's really cilantro. How do I know that it's really cilantro?
Okay, so they're both saying that when you go to the market, maybe if you understood signs better, you could make better use of them, like the cantaloupes. Or maybe you go to somebody who's really a specialist and say, hey, you're a specialist in fruits and vegetables. Which one of these cantaloupes shows the sign of what I want? And then the other question is, what if you mislabel, in a sense where instead of cilantro it says it's parsley or, yes, Eugene?
I like to use a very pragmatic approach that take the supermarket with.
Good.
By using, based on the Prajnaparamita Sutra, at the very beginning,
Yes?
praise, respect the Buddha, that level. Okay? We are able to differentiate vividly, not abandoned, to differentiate vividly, clearly, like a mirror, all the signs. But at the same time, my inner mind is so stable. It will in the inner peace, the ultimate reality, as opposed to differentiation. That's the worldly reality or worldly wisdom, as opposed to the ultimate wisdom. It's very practical. That's my opinion. Ideally, that's the Buddha's level based on Buddha.
That comment was to say that the Buddhists have two truths. One is the more ultimate truth or transcendent, and the other is just the mundane truth that we have to live with every day. So does it mean in the Prajnaparamita that you get rid of signs in the mundane world, or do you only get rid of them in the super transcendent stage of wisdom or of truth? And that's from the Vimalakirti Nirdesha that he got this idea good. Yeah, these are good. Yes?
Or maybe it's rather
So she's bringing up the question of whether or not when we see a sign, we have an expectation of what that sign means, and that affects us, or we go into a situation already with an expectation, so we notice those signs which either live up to our expectations or miss out on them. So I think that expectation is very important. It does influence us enormously as to whether we go into a situation already upset or already happy. Whatever we go in with is going to really influence how we see the signs. Yes, in the back.
I think the sign that I can have a sign, but we just don't have to be too attached. Just because we realize there is a sign there, but we don't have to attach. Rather, we see what is really the reality, the truth, where it is not reality, and we base on that, and then we just live our own truth.
So he's suggesting that we're going to see signs. They're going to be with us. But we don't have to be attached to them. We can have a different attitude toward them. And it's our reaction to the sign more than giving it up totally. Yes? Okay, so she's saying that if we're in pain, that dominates us. We can become obsessive about a particular sign or a particular pain, and then how do we get away from that kind of being dominated by the sign? Yeah. Yes? I think I understand what you're asking, that when we have a sign and we have our reaction to it, we also know that there are perhaps a whole multitude of other things which are occurring, or we have conditions which are not necessarily we're so aware of, but that we are living in a context. And that sign is occurring in that context, and we have to see how much that's affecting us. Yeah. So she's saying, take an alarm clock goes off in the morning, it's a sign to get up. In order to get up or wake up without that sign, you have to have some kind of practice so you get yourself ready to wake up at the right time. And some people can do that. I'm not one of them. If the alarm clock doesn't go off and I wake up and I say, oh yeah, I feel pretty good, I know I'm late. I've slept too long. But yes, we rely upon that particular kind of alert. A sign is an alert. And if we don't have an alert, have we developed internal mechanisms which alert us without this external sign? Good. Yes?
You said the sutra says something like don't use signs. Could it be interpreted as don't rely on signs? A little different.
Well, in terms of the equivalence for the words, it's sometimes very hard to make that distinction, whether it means don't rely on it or don't use it. Even in English, it
Don't rely on it does allow for this notion that it's useful, but you just can't fully take only
yeah. Okay, so he was saying that it's a question of whether we rely on signs up to a point where we don't let them get out of hand. We have control over how much they function. Yes? Good thoughts. Yes, please. Yeah. Yes. Well, with the Sanskrit, it's the Chinese, let's say, it's the sign implies a characteristic. That is, that tells us that this is something. It's an identification characteristic. So if we can say, therefore, an alarm clock is a characteristic of a sign which alerts. Some signs alert us to things. And so, but you're quite right. I think the text leaves it open as to how broad it's going to be, and it gets very broad. These are examples of characteristics which are used in various ways. So sometimes a sign tells us whether the fruit is ripe. The sign is used to identify a quality of the thing we're looking at. Other times the sign tells us a direction, gives us information about how we should proceed. Those are physical signs. Other is, I can say I have signs of catching a cold. What are the signs? I have the symptoms. So sometimes sign means symptoms. I have all of these uses of it. But it's also a sign in some sense is, a sign signifies something. It's not the thing which is signified. The sign refers me to something else, but it's not the thing itself. So the road sign is not the road. It just signifies something about the road. So therefore, I think what they probably, to some degree, are saying is that a sign in terms of wisdom is it's not wisdom itself. The sign is not wisdom, but it's signifying some approach, some way to deal with it. But it's a good point. We've been using it very broadly. Yes? Mm-hmm. She's just asked a question, if I have a gut feeling, I have a reaction, is that feeling that I have, which is just intuitive almost, is that feeling the sign, or is it the result of a sign? Is that what you said? Yeah. Now there was a noise. That's a sign. It's a shadow. I'm not sure what happened. If you ask me to tell you what happened, something fell. You can see that I'm struggling with the sign. I'm struggling with... I won't even ask. No, I appreciate the sound effects. We need them. But you can see how we can get a sign. We can have a characteristic, that sign which comes to us, whether it's a noise or whatever it is, and then after the sign itself, like with the sound, the sign itself is pure in one sense. It's just what it is. I immediately take it in and I start working with that sign, and I can build up a wonderful story. I can say, oh, that must have been an iPhone he dropped. I'm sure it's probably damaged. That means I can't phone him anymore because he's damaged his iPhone. How could he have done that? But then that's just a story which I've taken from this pure sign of a noise. And once I start processing it, then I take that sign and make it into whatever. And I don't know whether what I've told, the story I tell about it, is true or not. It's very hard not to make a narrative. You know, we make narratives about each other. And I can say, oh, that person smiled or frowned, and then I can make a story to myself. What did that mean? And it's probably, my story has nothing to do with reality. I've taken the sign and made a narration, and the narration is not really true. Suzuki Roshi at the Zen Center in San Francisco wrote a book, and it was one of his major teachings to always have a beginner's mind. A beginner's mind says that every event, every moment, you allow yourself to try to have that experience without a lot of baggage. It's as if you're seeing everything for the first time. And in a sense, that's signlessness. Your question earlier was, what's the opposite of a sign? And they put the character in Chinese, which says to be lacking. Wu. It lacks that characteristic, whatever it is that's lacking. So to have a beginner's mind is very hard. It's like during the period of time when abstract expressionism came into art, people like Picasso, in one sense, were trying to figure out what would it be like to make art without being influenced by all your training. How could you go back and get to the art which you were not directed at in terms of the training? And so they were trying, like Picasso, to throw off all the signs they had been given about how you do art. And he was trying to say, if I get back to just a signless art, that is an untrained art, something which is not seen as good or the usual way of doing it, what would my art look like? Well, to some people, his art looked very wild and woolly, and they didn't like it. It was certainly different. Today, we look at it, and a lot of people really like it. We've learned to appreciate abstraction. But how do you get to that? Artists are often ones who are trying desperately to do this. Maybe more than other people, artists try to figure out how can you get beyond what you normally do and be creative. For them, it's creativity. Anybody else? Thank you very much. These are good comments. Well, I go back to my slides here. Prajnaparamita says, then, if I'm going to do this, it's difficult because I feel like I'm blind. I don't know. If I don't have a sign, I'm like blindness. And then it says, if everybody in the world has the same opinion, it's sometimes like having everybody in the world being blind. Just because everybody's that way doesn't mean that they can find the gateway. That you just have to ask yourself the question of how in the world do you deal with life in terms of being denied this kind of information. It's a little bit like, I love to watch small children because of all the people, there is a kind of innocence of signs in small children. And you just watch them exploring the world. And you realize they are exploring something for the first time, and they often don't have a word for what they're looking at. They don't know how it functions, and you can see them feeling it and trying to comprehend it. What is this window latch? What is this wristwatch? What is this necklace that their mother has on? They want to feel it, they want to explore it, because they don't have enough signs to tell them its function or anything else. They're trying for the first time to learn it. So that's why Picasso and the other artists who tried to go back to that kind of level of just removing all the debris of training. And there is something to it. If you're highly trained, that's what you're going to do. If you're highly trained in a professional capacity, that is what you will do, because you're good at it, and you know how to do it, and you just immediately do that. But suppose you decided one day that whatever you're highly trained at, what would it be like if I didn't do it that way? What would that do? How would I operate? I suppose bookkeeping is something which you could say, well, that's very precise kind of data management. How can you change how you manage that data, its assets and deficits and all of those issues? And this is exactly what came up when people had to ask themselves the question of, can you have a software which takes the place of a lot of bookkeeping? If you can do that, how could you think differently so that you could make that happen? In my field and with my own self, I've thought often that I was trained in a certain way in Buddhism. A lot of the things that I was trained to think about Buddhism, I don't think anymore. I find that things change, people have more information. When you get more information, then the way in which you were trained previously just won't work with the new data. How do you allow yourself to give up what you were so strongly taught and figure out whether there's another way to look at something with a beginner's mind without the normal signs? So creativity, I think, requires some of this giving up of signs, because that means giving up your normal way of seeing and thinking about things. And that can be good, or it can lead you to nothing. It's like research, an experiment. An experiment can be successful, or an experiment can show you that your idea is totally wrong. And it's very hard to say even negative result is learning. We don't want that. We want our idea to be fulfilled. So it's, some of you have lived through this with me a little bit with working on the Atlas of Maritime Buddhism. That was a new project for me, and then I had a gut feeling that all the Buddhist sites in South India, they tended to cluster at seaports. But then when we did the research and actually went out there and mapped every single site in southern India, I had to wait to see whether or not I was right or wrong. In that case, I could say, generally, yes, they cluster at seaports. I also had to say, but they also go inland. You can't just have necessarily yes or no answers. We are always dealing with fuzziness, and we don't like that, but we have to deal with it. So if I'm blind, finding my way is really difficult. Then the Prajnaparamita takes us into another realm. All of a sudden, it begins to look quite unphilosophical. You can be really working with philosophical issues, and then it says, if you follow counterfeit Prajnaparamita, what's going to happen to you? You're going to go to hell. Very simple. It's not the answer you would expect. We don't expect to be told it's going to be torment. Hell is very interesting for the Buddhists to have dealt with. As far as we can tell, it's the Buddhists who really invented the idea of punishment in hell. That is, that the dead are punished. It's not something that you find in other cultures. The dead can be in a strange, amorphous place. They can be unhappy. But to actually say, when you go to this rebirth, you're going to be tortured, is a rather dramatic step for a religion to take. So I've tried to think in the Prajnaparamita, why would it put this much emphasis on the hells? We're talking about getting away from signs. We're talking about getting away from being not enlightened. And I think that it basically, it seems to me that the idea of hells is, of course, a lot of people take them quite literally, and they are a thing, and they happen in rebirth, and you have to go through it, and there it is. So that is true. On the other hand, it also says that if you can't handle some of these issues about how you deal with the reality of things, then the result will be torture. And torture comes in many different varieties. And we torture ourselves very often, as we all know, I think, when we rely on signs, we really do torture ourselves. Somebody frowns, and I take that sign, and I go off on a journey which takes me days and days of worry and fretting. And if that's not hell, I don't know what is. We just can't stop ourselves. We just become obsessed. You're talking about obsessed. If I can't deal with something which comes at me, and I am open to all of this obsessive behavior, then it is, you can use hell as a metaphor for that if you wish, that we are faced with a torturous experience. And how we get out of that torturous experience is a challenge. How do you feel about the text talking, or the Buddhists talking about hells? You know, it's almost an embarrassment at times in the Western world. We want Buddhism to be free of all of these kind of superstitious things. We can sometimes say people don't like it. And yet, it's there. And it's there in rather sizable amounts. So I just wonder what people think. Do you find it vaguely embarrassing? Upsetting? Doesn't apply to you?
Let's see, I paid for a tuition when I was already told I was going to hell, so I'm okay.
Oh, you're ready.
I'm already ready to go to hell.
Yeah. Yes? Yeah, there are a number of, her statement is that this is beyond, if you're going to have nirvana, you're going to have the opposite. You're going to have a hell, which is the opposite of nirvana. You're going to have bliss, or you're going to have torture in one sense. you have the opposites. And I think that's also, some people have done it with Pure Land and hell, that in many ways they're the opposites. So in the Japanese culture, for example, you have people in hell and they look up all the way to the Pure Land and they see people living in a blissful existence, and then they're living on a, sometimes the image is given, they're living on like a lotus blossom up there in heaven, and the stem is coming down into the dirt and the muck of the hell, and they're looking up through the stem and see people up there having a pretty good time. I want to go up there. So people decide they're going to climb up right then and there, but what stops them? Do you know? Pardon? The other people in hell. They pull you back. They won't let you go. Pardon? Okay. He refers to sand crabs trying to get out of a pail of sand. The other sand crabs stop it.
Talking about like embarrassment and superstition in the scriptures, it does seem a little bit like that, but also it seems kind of a little bit accurate in terms of like warfare, and especially modern warfare, when you see people during the Second World War and other wars
Yeah.
today, child soldiers and those things. So it doesn't seem that much of a stretch, from those kind of I'm sure in ancient times.
So he's saying that when we look at the world in which we live, warfare and children being asked to be soldiers and the destruction which is happening in the world at any given time, it's not too different from what you describe in these hells. Well, anyway, this is one of the issues for the Prajnaparamita. As I said, when I first read the Prajnaparamita and I came across this, I was sailing along with the philosophical issues, and it was all nice and neat and very sterile and clean, and then all of a sudden I came across that if you don't get this, then you're going to go to hell, and it was like, what? I was stunned. Yes?
I guess I do feel like it, I wouldn't have used the word embarrassed, but I feel like it's a little bit of a cop-out. I mean, I'm interested in Buddhism, and I'm interested because I believe it makes its case for this life. And when you talk about if you don't do this, you'll go to hell, or even if you do that, you're going to go to a heaven, I feel like that's kind of a cop-out. You know, that you can't make the case for your life here, so you'll make the case that you have this regret or this promise for the next life. And one reason I'm interested in Buddhism is that I feel like it makes a very good case for this life. So I'm
Okay.
kind of not worrying about those questions because I've got enough
Okay.
from this life.
So he's saying that he feels that what is appealing in Buddhism is that it seems to direct us to how we live this life and what we do in this life. So if you start talking about the Pure Land and hells, that's another lifetime. It's outside of this world, and his interest flags. And he's not going to really worry about that. It seems not what he wishes to deal with. It varies tremendously in Buddhism. The part of Buddhism where I find the most interest and attention paid to the hells is Japan. Their art and their practices with regard to this are quite developed, and it's there, it's in their culture. How this was migrated to the West and became such a part of Christianity has also always interested me. I don't know how that happened. I don't see the punishment of the dead or post-mortem punishment. I don't see it in Western culture except coming through the biblical tradition. And even in the biblical tradition with Judaism, Sheol is not a place of punishment for deeds done. It's just a bad burial place. So I think it's worth, though, thinking about. I'd like to hear your ideas and whatever thoughts you have about why this would be used in Prajnaparamita literature. You get other surprising things. One of them is that it says, what if the teacher is exhausted? So I'm sorry to say, I just came off this long trip to China. So, poor things, you were exposed to an exhausted teacher last night. But it also says that one of the issues before us is who's going to help you with all of this? We're talking about the Bodhisattva today. The Bodhisattva is one of the teachers for, if the Buddha's not around, then the Bodhisattva is here. How do you have, if a teacher is exhausted, it simply says, suppose the teacher just doesn't fulfill what you need. What then? How do you handle that? And this is something which is a issue which I can only say I think is being made stronger by the internet. A lot of people in this course, we have people on the internet. So how do you handle the virtual teacher? Those of you on the internet, you could answer in some ways, but what happens when you're dealing with what we are more and more seeing, which is, I was very interested to talk to people at Harvard. Their internet courses are huge. Millions of people are tuning into the Harvard MIT courses. And one of their courses in physics has been totally automated. There is no human contact during that course. And yet, it seems like you're interacting with somebody. There are questions and answers, and you have a whole series, and the grading and the response to papers even has been automated. It's an amazing course. What they've done with that is truly amazing. So what do you do if you're being taught and the sign that you normally have is somebody who's sitting in front of you, or you're watching a talking head? But many of the students who take that course do not realize that there is no human there. In other words, the signs of the human are there, but the human is not there. The human was there who prepared it at great expense. It's a very expensive course to prepare because it's so sophisticated, and the ways in which it responds are very sophisticated. So the question of what do you do if the teaching side of something begins to fall down? So the answer to the Prajnaparamita is to read and copy the Prajnaparamita. Just to read and copy it will provide the energy needed to continue. So if you find the teaching is not up to standard, take out your pen and pencil and start copying one line of the Prajnaparamita. But I will say this, in my work with Buddhist research, I have found that there are times when you read the literature and you've read everybody's speculations, and then it seems like you reach some kind of limit. I mean, what else can you say? Then it seems to me if you turn back to the actual texts themselves, suddenly the energy flows back into the work. You just find all kinds of new ideas. They're full of ideas. They're full of challenges. And so the idea of saying to people, you need to read, copy, memorize, do something is part of the process that we're talking about. If you want to try to solve these issues, then what I really want you to do is to read the Prajnaparamita Sutras all over again with all this in mind. Instead of reading them just as a straight thing, you're reading them looking for the answer. And they're online. A number of Prajnaparamita texts are online. You can find the 8,000 line is on there. There's the Diamond Sutra several times, Heart Sutra. So my recommendation to all of you is, if you're writing a paper and if you're saying, I don't know, I've seemed to have reached as far as I can reach, go and look at it, and it's going to give you a whole new energetic push. How many of you have ever read a Buddhist sutra? Yes? You don't know. But you have, I know you've read. If you read a sutra, it's difficult literature to deal with, I think. They're not filled with stories. It's not filled with easy stuff. It's challenging. And that's why recently the Buddhist community decided to try to do a new Buddhist Bible. Once again, we go back and try to find, can we make a single text of the Buddhist material which would capture all the aspects of Buddhism and could be made easily available to a general reader. So they put to work a group of 20 scholars. They asked them to retranslate and not use old translations, but to retranslate in modern terminology as much as possible the important text in particular areas. And so they came up with a 400-page book filled with footnotes, and we all looked at it and said, you're going to put this in a hotel room? This is what a tired traveler is going to pick up at night and spend hours and hours during the night reading all of this material. In other words, it's just like what I think we've faced with last night when I challenged you with, every time you think you have it, you may not have it. And if you think, oh, now I have it, you may not have it. And this is where the Buddhist sutras themselves are constantly challenging us. And how to deal with that is a question which the Buddhists have not solved. And we didn't solve it with this project. We made a study guide, but it didn't turn out to be the thing which everybody wanted, which was a Buddhist Bible of Buddhism in its essence, all captured. Have any of you tried to read one of the Buddhist Bibles? There are several types of them out. Have you ever looked at the Buddha's word in the hotels? What was your experience with it?
Sometimes it can be a little confusing because I found it to be a little confusing because I felt like the version I was looking at was pulled from different contexts, and so it didn't particularly integrate well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I decided for this course, let's stick with the Prajnaparamita. Let's just take one kind of sutra and see what it's like to just delve into it at a rate which allows us to make some sense of it. And even that is very difficult, as you can tell, as we try to work our way through. So I'm putting a sign on it. So when we're talking about how we deal with the issue, as you know, just to kind of summarize before we go to lunch, here we are. We have a text which tells us there is something called wisdom. There is something called enlightenment. There is something called all knowledge. There is something called perfection of wisdom. And when we start looking to see, well, how do you find it? How do you deal with it? And how do you use it? The texts tell us, first of all, it seems like they spend an inordinate amount of time simply praising the text. This Prajnaparamita is wonderful. It does great things. You should really follow it. And you want to say, all right, I get that. We have to ask, how can we go beyond just praising it? Because what we want to ask is, well, why is it so great? What is there about this literature that makes it so great? What is it that it does? So then it says, well, first of all, it tells you that there's something you have to do in order to proceed toward these great high states of spiritual development. Good. Now I want to know what that is. And then when it starts telling me what it is, it says to me that first of all, you have to realize that you're blind to it. That you probably don't start with the final capabilities of dealing with this path. The path is something which you're not ready for in one sense. So then it's okay, I want to make myself ready. What do I do to make myself ready to follow this path? And then it begins to say, if you're going to make yourself ready to follow the path, you have to practice. Fine. Practice what? Should I practice meditation? But it doesn't tell me how to meditate. It is not a meditation manual. So then I say, okay, I need to have a teacher. And I need to go off and have somebody tell me what this all means. Who will be the teacher? What will they teach me? Will they teach me to meditate? Will they teach me just how to think about it? Am I just going to have an intellectual exercise trying to deal with this material? And these are issues which you face when you deal with this. That's why I've tried to say I believe that the text actually does provide the mechanism for understanding how to get to it, to its ultimate goal. And part of that is that we have to reach the limit of our perception. And we have to push ourselves till we see that what we normally do can only take us so far. But we have to go as far as it takes us before we know how far that is. That's why I think when you see that people who do extraordinary things with their bodies and take their bodies to an extreme level of development, like people preparing for the Olympics, they spend a long time just practicing, and they practice over and over and over until they get to the point that when the actual event occurs, they maybe have, 3 minutes, and you either win or you lose, and all that effort. I mean, it's an incredible experience to watch them. But what it says is, do you know what your limit is? Do you really know what your limit is? I would suggest that we don't know, so consequently when the text tells us you need to do certain things, then I think, I can't do that. It's just like today, I ask you to give up signs. I said, suppose you gave them all up. Could you do it? Could you go shopping? Could you go out here and have a break? Can you go to lunch? Can you do all of these things without a sign? And the response, I was really pleased how many of you responded. That was really interesting and nice. What you were saying is, no. Basically, you said no. You could not see how you could deal in life without the signs. That was the answer. So therefore, if you tried to do it, what level could you do it? Or could any of us do it? So the question is, how do you test your limits? How many of you have ever stayed awake as long as you could possibly stay awake to see how long you can stay awake? How long can you stay awake?
Overnight and go to work the following day. Yeah, we do all-night papers, put it all-night.
That's probably not your limit. How many of you have tried to see what your limit is as to how far you can walk?
Mountaineering, it's a fact of like hiked all night in the mountains and got we did one trip with a couple of nightmare trips actually with mountaineering type trips, so basically walking all night, walking all day, and finally it's not as far. I mean we eventually got that.
Did you feel you were at your limit?
Pretty close.
Pretty close. So if you do that, don't you feel that then in the normal day, having done that, you realize how far you are from your limit in your normal activity?
Yeah, it takes a lot of conditioning too. You couldn't do it without a certain amount of conditioning, just being used
Yeah.
to, doing that
Yeah.
on a regular basis.
Sure.
So, yeah,
How many of you have ever tried to see how long you could go without eating? Has anybody ever fasted? How long? 5 days. Yes? Do you feel that you reached your limit? Okay. So she's just said that when she took a 5-day fast, that was her limit. She found herself unable to really. Some people have a much longer period. Yeah. My mother decided that she did not want to live any longer when she was 92, and she asked us to allow her to fast to death. Very hard decision. We made a decision that she could do as she wished, although we would offer her food. She lived for 56 days without eating. Isn't that, she took water, that's all. Her limit was really long. Now here's a suggestion. Sometimes people who are trying to test their limits will feel they've reached the limit, and then if they continue, they can sometimes go through that limitation, and then they can go for a much longer period. That can happen to people. I'm not asking you to do all these things. I'm just asking you how you have tested your own limitation. How long have you gone without water? How long do you think your limitation would be?
I know water. I led a hike and one of my participants got dehydrated and told me with vegetable. Just talking like in the plane. It's not long. If you get dehydrated, basically you're turning into a vegetable. Depends on what you're doing, of course, when you're hiking around the desert, it doesn't help. But normally hiking a few hours, maybe 4 hours, 5 hours, just doing daily activities. It's not going to be longer, but it wouldn't be more than a day.
There is a Buddhist meditation in Japan that tests this. And you get no water for 10 days. And that takes you to the edge of death. And I know one person who's done it. And when I asked him why, what do you think you gained by doing that extreme kind of testing of yourself, the answer was that it makes life after that so much easier to live because you don't worry about yourself so much. You realize that your limitation is far longer than you ever thought, far greater than you could ever imagine that you had. So what this says to me is when we're looking at the Prajnaparamita literature, and it's asking us to test the limit of our perception. The limit of our perception, I think, is far greater than we know, because we have never tested it. We have never pushed ourselves to the limit of what we can think and how we can think it. what happens when we take ourselves to that limit in which there is actually no more thought, no more perception. It's the limitation. We've taken it to the very limit. So this text is saying, if you take yourself to the very limit of your perceptive process, then you will finally understand what your perception is. If you don't take yourself somehow to the very limit, you will never know. And I think that is why we do meditation. You can ask the question of, to what level can I go in meditation? Do I know to what level I can safely go? Do I know what level I can go in really pushing myself without, as you said, reaching dehydration to the level that you become a vegetable, lose the ability to become pathological. So when I think about what the Prajnaparamita text is telling me, it's saying, first of all, just for me to recognize I've never really tested myself. I have not tested myself in terms of how far can I go without signs. I've never tested myself. I have no idea. How far can I go with developing myself to the point where I really begin to understand that limitation horizon and see how far I can go before I pass over into another area which might be very dangerous. So that is a part of what I think the Course is. I would like for you to this week begin to think about what are my limitations? And that certainly ties into everyday life. What is my limitation for tolerance of somebody else? Do I know how much I can take? You know. Pardon?
Without divorce.
Yes, without divorce. How far can I go? I travel a lot, and I realize that I think my level of tolerance of people giving me a hard time is pretty high, maybe, but when I see those people behind the airline counters, I think these people have to take themselves to levels of tolerance of being yelled at that are far beyond any tolerant level that I think I could stand. And it says that we have to begin to understand what is doing this is also compassion to some degree. That is, if I begin to think about what level I can handle, then, and I see how limited my own levels are, then when I see somebody else who's being pushed to their limitation, I can understand it. That is compassion in one way, is to comprehend just how far you can go, and then to understand that maybe what I'm seeing in somebody else is just as far as they can go. They can't go beyond that. And as a teacher, you have to learn to ask yourself that everybody in this room has a different level of how far you can go in whatever direction it is. And each of you has a different level, a different direction. And sometimes it absolutely amazes me how far people can go. And that people sometimes go much farther than they themselves know. That's what really interests me the most. Is I can have a student will say, well, I didn't get very far. And then they show you a paper in which they have made 2 or 3 really brand new discoveries. And you say, well, didn't you know that you made these discoveries? No. I didn't know that my level of pushing had taken me farther than most people have ever gone. We don't know ourselves, is often where we are. So we're going to go to lunch. I see our hostess here. So we have a sign. We have a sign of an open door. We have a sign of a smiling nun standing by an open door. I ask you to ask yourself how you're going to respond to this sign. While you have lunch, again, see if you can give up one sign. And ask yourself what's happening when you at least try giving up one. All right, see you at, we'll come back at 1:30.